Hi everyone, my name is Santiago Avila Jr. and this is My Story. I was born in Chicago on January 3rd, 1983. I come from a Mexican father and a Cuban mother. My story today, I'm going to focus on my mom's side of the family. And I want to talk a little bit about communism and Cuba and some of the hardships that my parents went through or my grandparents went through. And my grandfather was a political prisoner in Cuba. He was in prison from 1969 to about 1979, just after, about 10 years after Fidel Castro came into power in 1959. And I remember my mom telling me some of the stories, just as my grandma used to tell me as well, and she still does actually. Some of the hard things that they had to go through. My mom telling me how she had to go to these school camps they were forced on them to go to. And, all for the sake of education and learning and things like that. So it was a mandatory thing. It's not like they had a choice to do it. It was mandatory. I recall some time ago, my grandma telling me, I decided to ask her, hey, how did you guys come here from Cuba? How was the trip? And I know my mom was there as well. And we just started talking about it. I've always been curious. I mean, my grandfather and I used to talk a lot about this. And for him, it was always so hard to talk about it though. And if you see me get a little emotional, I apologize. My grandfather passed away from cancer, unfortunately. But I'm still blessed to still have my grandmother and, my mom here. And but my grandma and my mom told me the story on how they came to America from Cuba, a little island 90 miles away from Key West. They told me that there was a time, I guess, Fidel decided to open up the prisons, and they called it a Mariel. They opened the prisons, and it was around May 20, 1980, if I recall the dates that my mom and my grandma told me. They opened up in Mariel, and they opened up the prison systems, and they just let all these people come here to America. And America opened his arms and received them. And I know Fidel took advantage of that, and he tried to send as many people that opposed any of his views as he possibly could. My mom and my grandma were telling me the story. They came in a little boat called the Oriola. And my mom recalls that she was watching the oceans and the waves. There was a really bad storm, and at times there was moments when you would see a little boat a little bit far ahead, and then all of a sudden a wave would come and it would go back down, and then the boat was gone. She recalls seeing these fins in the ocean, and my grandpa telling her, hey, don't worry about it, those are dolphins, they're just swimming around to protect us. Little did she know that they weren't dolphins, they were actually sharks. Our family, my mom's side of the family, was one of the first families to get to the United States from Cuba. They spent a couple days in Key West, and then they went to a refugee camp in Pennsylvania for a couple months. And then the Cuban American Association actually petitioned them, and they went and they moved to New Mexico. But as I grew up, I always heard the stories of socialism, communism in Cuba. My grandpa, those of you that are watching that know my grandfather know that he's by no means is he a very religious man, or he's a man that used to be very talkative about these things. He used to talk about other stuff. My grandpa, he was always, I always saw him as a happy man. And even though he was always serious, he wasn't as affectionate as you would expect people to be affectionate or whatever, but he was always happy. And you can see him at his happiest when he was around his family. And He used to tell me, how lucky I was to be born in a country like America. And at times I was really young. I didn't understand what my grandfather meant with that. I mean, it made no sense. I mean, here I am, a free kid growing up in an amazing country with all my natural freedoms. And I decided to ask him one day, grandfather, what do you mean with that? I don't understand. And he said, you see, in my country that I love, I was born, but I wasn't born with any rights. You were born in this country, and you were born with natural rights. Rights, if you feel like saying you don't like the president, you can say it. Rights to wake up, and if you want to be a worker in this or worker in that, you can do whatever you want. Your possibilities are limitless. And he was right. He was so right. My grandfather, I remember him coming. We lived at a time in Florida, and he used to come with my grandmother from New Mexico to pay us a visit. And man, he was the happiest at that time. And why am I talking about my grandfather in this story of mine? Why bring up something that seems a little bit painful? My grandfather, I can say, has been somebody I've looked up to for the courage that he had to take his family on a dangerous trip. And I understand it was only 90 miles, but it's a dangerous trip like the one he came on with his family on a boat that was overpacked with people because they were forced to bring more people than that boat can handle for freedom. You see, my grandfather passed away about 2 years ago from cancer, but my grandfather died a free man and not a political prisoner in the prisons of Cuba. I'm blessed to have the family I have. And I see where America sometimes is heading to. And my message to everybody, and I know this is a very short video, but my mom used to tell me a story. She says she remembers when she was going, when they were leaving for Mariel, that a bunch of Cuban people would get around the area where all the Cubans were leaving, or they would be going into this building where all the Cubans were, signing up because they wanted to leave Cuba. They wanted to go towards freedom. And the same Cuban people would scream at them, "Gusanos! Prostitutas!" It was really bad. It was heart-wrenching. A lot of them would be out there with sticks and pipes, and they would beat these Cubans up. All they wanted was freedom. If you look at what America is going through today, I see all these young people, younger than me, I'm young myself, but younger than me, okay with socialism, thinking that socialism is somehow, some way good for this country. It saddens me. It saddens me to think that an American citizen would consider socialism as a way to better this country. Just think about this. I think about this. If there was no America around the 1980s, if there was no America, where would my grandfather and my mom and my two aunts and my uncle and my grandmother, where would they have gone? If there was that one shining city on a hill, if that did not exist, where would my grandfather have taken his family for freedom? The United States is that shining city on the hill. When people talk about freedom, when people talk about liberty, the first thing that comes to their mind is the United States of America. Let us never allow America to become a socialist country. And if I can, I wanna give a quick message to my family in Spanish. Yo sé que algún día ustedes van a poder ver a su Cuba libre. Pero aún si no fuera así, yo sé que todos ustedes van a seguir levantando la bandera americana que mi bello país le ha dado tanto cariño y tanto amor orgullosamente. Y aunque no nacieron aquí, ustedes también son americanos de corazón. Thank you so much for taking the time for listening to my story. My name is Santiago Avila, and this was my story from the heart.